The easiest way to discover the heart of a person is to watch how they treat someone who has nothing to offer them. On a cold Friday evening, when Manhattan glowed beneath thousands of lights and polished black cars lined the curb outside Carter House, the city's most celebrated fine dining restaurant, no one noticed the old man standing quietly across the street. His oversized coat looked worn from countless winters. His boots carried the dust of sidewalks that most wealthy guests never walked. A faded knit cap shaded silver hair, and a small canvas bag rested over one shoulder. Drivers avoided looking at him. Couples hurried past as though poverty might be contagious if acknowledged for too long. The doorman glanced once, then quickly returned to greeting guests whose names appeared on reservation lists weeks in advance. Inside, crystal chandeliers painted warm reflections across marble floors while the soft notes of a jazz piano drifted through conversations about investments, vacations, and business deals worth more than most families earned in a lifetime. Every table had been reserved. Every chair mattered, or so everyone believed. Emily Brooks balanced 3 dinner plates on one arm while thanking an elderly couple for their patience with a smile that reached her blue eyes. After another double shift, her feet ached inside shoes that had survived far too many 14-hour days, yet she still greeted every customer with the same quiet warmth. She believed people remembered how they were treated long after they forgot what they had ordered. It was the first lesson her late father had ever taught her, and she had never let it go. Near the entrance, the restaurant manager frowned as the old man slowly stepped through the revolving door. Conversations softened. Several guests instinctively looked away. One woman tightened her grip on her designer handbag. A businessman whispered something that made his companions chuckle under their breath. The manager crossed the lobby before the stranger could take another step. "Sir, I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight." His polished smile never reached his eyes. The old man nodded politely. "I understand. I was only hoping for a small seat in the corner. I'll happily pay for a bowl of soup." The manager's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry. Company policy." He gestured discreetly toward the door. "Perhaps another restaurant." The old man simply lowered his eyes and thanked him anyway. There was no argument, no embarrassment, only quiet acceptance that somehow made the room feel colder than the December wind outside. Emily had witnessed the entire exchange from across the dining room. She looked toward the reservation board. Every table was occupied except for one small 2-seat table beside the front window. It remained empty because the party assigned to it had canceled less than 10 minutes earlier. The manager planned to save it for potential VIP walk-ins. Emily picked up a clean menu, filled a glass with fresh water, and walked toward the entrance before anyone could stop her. "Sir," she said gently, offering a calm smile instead of pity, "if you don't mind sitting by the window, I have a seat waiting for you." For the first time that evening, the old man looked directly into her eyes. Around them, silence spread slowly through the dining room. Some guests stared in disbelief. Others exchanged amused glances, convinced the young waitress had just made the biggest mistake of her career. None of them realized that the lonely man she had welcomed with nothing more than kindness owned every brick, every chandelier, every chair beneath that very roof. Emily gently pulled out the chair beside the window and waited until the elderly man settled into it before placing the menu in front of him with the same careful respect she showed every guest. She poured fresh water into his glass and smiled warmly. "Take your time. Our tomato basil soup is still available, and the bread just came out of the oven a few minutes ago." The old man looked at her with quiet curiosity, as though kindness had become something unexpectedly rare. "That sounds perfect," he replied softly. "Thank you." Emily nodded without asking another question. She did not wonder where he had come from. She did not ask why his coat looked so worn or why his hands trembled slightly from the cold. To her, every customer deserved a peaceful meal before they deserved an explanation. Across the dining room, whispers floated between polished tables. One guest frowned openly. Another motioned toward the window with visible annoyance. That table could have gone to someone important, a man muttered to his wife. Near the entrance, the manager watched with growing frustration before walking briskly toward Emily. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked through a practiced smile. Emily stepped aside without losing her calm expression. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds." His voice remained low enough to avoid drawing attention. That table was being held for potential executive guests. We discussed this. Emily glanced briefly toward the window where the elderly customer quietly unfolded his napkin with careful hands. The reservation was canceled, she answered respectfully. He asked for one small seat, and we had one available. Mr. Reynolds exhaled slowly. Image matters in this business. Emily looked back at him with steady blue eyes. So does hospitality. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The manager adjusted his tie before finally saying, "Finish serving him quickly. If an important client arrives, we may need that table." Emily simply nodded and returned to the dining room. She placed a basket of warm bread on the table. "Please be careful. The plate is still hot." The old man smiled with genuine appreciation. "You remembered." Emily laughed softly. People usually enjoy warm bread more than cold bread. His eyes lingered on her for another moment, studying not her uniform, but the quiet confidence behind her words. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "Almost 3 years," she answered while arranging the silverware. "Long enough to know that Friday nights are always busy. And yet you still found time for someone everyone else wanted to ignore." Emily paused only briefly. "Everyone gets hungry. That part is the same for all of us." The old man lowered his eyes toward the steaming bowl of soup she carefully placed before him. The aroma filled the small corner near the window, creating a pocket of warmth against the winter darkness outside. For the first time in many years, William Carter found himself eating inside one of his own restaurants without anyone recognizing his face, his fortune, or the company whose name hung above the entrance. Strangely, it was also the first time he felt like an ordinary guest. As Emily returned to her other tables, she never noticed the tiny leather notebook the old man quietly removed from his coat pocket. He wrote only one sentence before closing it again. "One employee still remembers what this company was built to become." William Carter lifted another spoonful of soup, allowing the warmth to settle in before quietly looking around the dining room. Nothing had changed about the elegant furniture, the polished silverware, or the carefully arranged flowers on every table. Everything appeared exactly as he had designed it years ago, yet something felt strangely unfamiliar. He watched servers hurry from table to table with flawless precision, smiling because they had been trained to smile, speaking because they had memorized every line of excellent customer service. But Emily was different. She never seemed to perform kindness. She simply lived it. As she crossed the dining room carrying a heavy tray, she noticed an elderly couple struggling to read the evening specials beneath the soft candlelight. Without being asked, she adjusted the small table lamp closer to them and patiently explained every dish until both of them smiled with relief. A few minutes later, a young father apologized because his little daughter had accidentally spilled water across the tablecloth. Emily immediately knelt beside the table with fresh napkins. "Please do not worry," she said gently. "Accidents happen. We will have everything looking perfect again in just a moment." The father thanked her repeatedly, but she simply smiled and wished the little girl a happy dinner. William noticed something that statistics could never measure. Emily never looked at expensive watches before deciding how warmly to treat someone. Every guest received the same calm attention, whether they ordered a $50 steak or a simple bowl of soup. He slowly reached into his worn coat and opened the small notebook once more. Beneath his earlier sentence, he added another observation. "She notices people before she notices money." Across the room, Mr. Reynolds remained restless. Every few minutes he glanced toward the window where William sat, hoping the elderly stranger would finish quickly. When the hostess quietly informed him that another reservation had arrived without notice, his shoulders stiffened. For sharply dressed executives entered the restaurant speaking confidently about an upcoming acquisition. Mr. Reynolds greeted them enthusiastically before leading them toward the center of the dining room. One of the executives glanced toward the occupied window table. "That corner looks more private," he remarked. The manager forced an uneasy smile. "Unfortunately, it is already occupied." The executive frowned. "Can you move the gentleman somewhere else?" Mr. Reynolds hesitated only for a second before walking toward William with determined steps. Emily noticed immediately. She had just finished delivering coffee to another table when she saw the manager approaching the quiet guest beside the window. Something about the expression on his face made her pause. She watched as he politely cleared his throat. "Sir, I am terribly sorry for the inconvenience, but would you mind relocating to another seat? We have important clients who would prefer this table." William slowly looked up without speaking. There was no anger in his face, only quiet curiosity. Before he could answer, another calm voice reached the table. "There is no need to move him." Emily stood beside them holding a fresh pot of coffee. Her expression remained respectful, but her posture was steady. "He was welcomed here first. This table belongs to him for as long as he wishes to enjoy his dinner." Several nearby conversations faded into silence. Even the soft piano seemed to disappear beneath the unexpected stillness. William met Emily's eyes once again, and for the first time that evening, the smallest hint of a genuine smile appeared across his face. Emily's words lingered in the air long after she finished speaking. No one raised a voice. No one argued immediately. The silence itself became part of the conversation. Mr. Reynolds forced a polite smile that looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Emily," he said carefully, "our responsibility is to accommodate all guests as professionally as possible." She nodded respectfully. "That is exactly what I am trying to do." He lowered his voice. "Those executives reserve private rooms every month. They generate significant business for this restaurant." Emily glanced toward the elderly man, who quietly stirred the last spoonful of soup without interrupting either of them. Then she looked back at her manager. "He also came here to be served. He arrived first, and we welcomed him. If we move him now, we are telling every person in this room that respect depends on appearance." Several nearby diners exchanged thoughtful looks. A woman at the neighboring table slowly set down her wine glass. An older gentleman folded his newspaper and watched without saying a word. The conversation had quietly shifted from a seating arrangement to something much larger. Mr. Reynolds hesitated. He had managed luxury restaurants for nearly 15 years, and he had solved countless difficult situations. Yet this simple waitress had asked a question he could not answer without revealing what truly mattered to him. Across the dining room, the four executives remained standing beside the hostess station. One of them glanced impatiently at his watch before looking toward the occupied window table again. William observed every expression without drawing attention to himself. He noticed who avoided eye contact. He noticed who looked embarrassed. Most of all, he noticed Emily. She never sounded defiant. She never tried to embarrass her manager. She simply protected the dignity of a guest who could not protect it for himself. That distinction mattered more than anyone else realized. Emily picked up the coffee pot and gently refilled William's cup. "Would you like another slice of bread?" she asked with the same calm tone she had used from the beginning. William smiled softly. "Only if it is not too much trouble." "It is never trouble to serve someone who is enjoying dinner," she replied. A faint warmth appeared in his eyes. It had been years since anyone had answered him without recognizing his name first. As Emily walked toward the kitchen, one of the younger servers hurried beside her. "You know Mr. Reynolds is upset," he whispered nervously. "He could write you up for this." Emily continued walking without changing her pace. "Maybe," she answered quietly. "But if someone remembers this evening years from now, I hope they remember that our restaurant offered kindness before convenience." The young server looked back toward the dining room, uncertain whether she was courageous or simply impossible to understand. A few moments later, Emily returned carrying a small dessert plate with a warm butter roll she had asked the kitchen to prepare. She placed it gently beside William's coffee. "The chef had extra dough tonight," she said with an easy smile. "He would rather see it enjoyed than wasted." William looked at the fresh bread for several seconds before speaking. "You keep finding reasons to make people feel welcome." Emily shrugged lightly. "Sometimes people remember the smallest gestures the longest." William slowly broke the bread in half. His smile grew just enough to reveal quiet gratitude. Inside his coat pocket, his phone vibrated once. A brief message appeared across the locked screen from his executive assistant. The board members had arrived outside exactly on schedule. William ignored the notification and slipped the phone back into his pocket. For just a few more minutes, he wanted to remain exactly where Emily believed he belonged, not as the owner of the restaurant, but simply as a guest who had been offered a seat when no one else thought he deserved one. The dinner rush continued around them like a carefully rehearsed performance, yet William found his attention returning to Emily every few minutes. She moved through the dining room with quiet confidence, never rushing even when every table demanded something at once. She remembered one guest preferred sparkling water without ice. She brought an extra napkin to a little boy before he even realized he would need one. She congratulated an elderly couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary after noticing the tiny gold number on the centerpiece the hostess had nearly overlooked. None of these gestures appeared in the employee handbook William himself had approved years earlier. They came from somewhere deeper. As Emily collected empty plates from William's table, she noticed him rubbing his hands together almost unconsciously. Without mentioning it, she disappeared into the kitchen and returned a minute later carrying a plain ceramic mug. Gentle streams of steam curled into the warm light above the table. "This is not on the menu," she said with a gentle smile. "It is just hot tea with a little honey. It helps on cold evenings." William looked at the mug for a long moment before wrapping both hands around it. "You keep giving more than anyone asks for." Emily adjusted the spoon beside the cup. "Sometimes people ask without using words." He looked toward the large front windows where snow had begun falling softly across the city sidewalks. "And what made you think I needed this?" Emily glanced outside before answering. "Your coat kept the cold away, but your hands never stopped shaking." William smiled quietly. "You notice everything." She laughed softly. "Not everything. Just people." Before William could respond, a busser accidentally dropped a stack of polished forks near the service station. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the dining room, causing several guests to turn. The young employee immediately apologized, his face turning bright red with embarrassment. Mr. Reynolds started toward him with visible frustration, but Emily reached the young man first. She knelt beside him, helping gather every fork without saying a single critical word. "Everyone has one of those days," she whispered with an encouraging smile. "Take a deep breath. We will have everything ready again in less than a minute." The young employee nodded gratefully, his nervous hands becoming steady again. William watched the exchange in complete silence. Leadership, he thought, rarely announced itself. More often, it appeared in moments so ordinary that only careful eyes recognized their importance. He opened the small leather notebook once again and wrote another short sentence beneath the others. "The strongest person in the room is the one who quietly lifts everyone else." Just then, the restaurant doors opened once more. This time, several men and women wearing tailored business coats stepped inside, brushing snow from their shoulders. Their polished appearance immediately caught Mr. Reynolds' attention. He hurried toward them with his brightest professional smile, assuming they were the important visitors he had been waiting for all evening. The group exchanged brief greetings before one woman discreetly checked her phone and scanned the dining room with careful attention. Her eyes stopped at the small window table. She did not wave. She did not speak. She simply gave the slightest nod, almost too subtle for anyone else to notice. William saw it immediately, but calmly lifted his teacup as though nothing had happened. Emily remained completely unaware. She was helping another elderly guest button his coat before stepping back with the same warm smile she had offered every customer that evening. Outside, more black vehicles quietly pulled up along the curb, their headlights reflecting across the fresh snow, while inside the restaurant, the final moments of William's quiet experiment were beginning to unfold. The woman standing near the entrance quietly slipped her phone back into her coat pocket after receiving a single reply. The message contained only 3 words. "Wait for me." She nodded almost imperceptibly and remained exactly where she was. None of the guests recognized her as the chief operations officer of Carter Hospitality Group. To everyone else, she looked like another executive arriving late for dinner. William continued sipping the warm tea Emily had prepared, allowing himself a rare moment without schedules, meetings, or introductions. It had been years since he had experienced his own restaurant through the eyes of an ordinary customer. The difference was unsettling. Expensive furniture created comfort, but kindness created belonging. One could be purchased, the other could not. Emily stopped beside the window once more as she noticed William carefully folding the cloth napkin after finishing his meal. "Did you enjoy everything?" she asked. William looked up with quiet gratitude. "More than you probably realize." She smiled. "I am glad." He hesitated before asking another question. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you stand up for someone everyone else wanted to move?" Emily considered the question for a moment instead of answering immediately. Her eyes drifted toward the snow falling beyond the glass. "When I was 12 years old," she said softly, "my father lost his job. For several months we counted every dollar before buying groceries. One evening we walked into a small diner because it was the only place we could afford. We sat down, but another family arrived who looked wealthier than we did. Someone suggested giving away our table. William listened without interrupting. The waitress refused. Emily continued. She smiled at my father and said, "The first person through the door deserves the first seat at the table." I never forgot that sentence. William lowered his eyes to the empty teacup resting between his hands. Emily looked around the dining room before adding, "People remember dignity longer than luxury." Those 6 words settled deep inside him. Years ago, when Carter House had opened its very first location, he had written something remarkably similar in a notebook that only a handful of early employees had ever seen. Somewhere along the way, expansion, profits, and prestige had buried those simple values beneath polished branding and corporate presentations. Yet somehow this young waitress, who had never met him before tonight, was living the philosophy he himself had nearly forgotten. Before either of them could speak again, the front doors opened once more. The cold evening air swept briefly across the lobby as 6 more men and women entered wearing tailored coats with discreet silver lapel pins bearing the Carter Hospitality emblem. The hostess immediately straightened her posture. Mr. Reynolds hurried toward them with visible excitement, convinced the important corporate delegation had finally arrived. "Welcome to Carter House," he said warmly. "We have been expecting distinguished guests this evening." The woman William had noticed earlier smiled politely, but did not respond. Instead, every member of the group quietly looked toward the window table. Their expressions carried neither surprise nor confusion, only respect. Emily noticed their attention but assumed they were admiring the snowy view beyond the glass. She reached for William's empty soup bowl. "I hope you stay warm on your way home," she said sincerely. William looked into her calm blue eyes, and for a brief second, he almost regretted that the evening could not remain exactly as it was. Then, from somewhere outside, the soft sound of several luxury car doors closing echoed through the winter air, and every person near the entrance instinctively turned toward the restaurant windows. The quiet sound outside grew louder as one black sedan after another stopped along the curb, their headlights reflecting across the fresh snow like ribbons of light. Valets hurried toward the entrance with sudden urgency, while the conversations inside slowly faded into curious silence. Guests glanced through the tall windows, trying to understand why so many luxury vehicles had arrived at the same moment. Mr. Reynolds immediately straightened his jacket and smiled with renewed confidence. "Everyone, please excuse me," he announced softly to several nearby diners. "Our corporate leadership has arrived." He walked briskly toward the entrance, convinced this unexpected visit would become the highlight of the evening. Emily simply continued clearing tables, believing the executives were no different from any other guests who deserved a warm welcome. The group that had entered moments earlier remained standing quietly instead of taking their seats. Their attention never drifted from the small table beside the window. The woman wearing the silver lapel pin exchanged one brief glance with her colleagues before taking a respectful step forward. She stopped beside William and spoke with calm professionalism. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. The board members are ready whenever you are." Time itself seemed to pause. The words settled over the dining room more heavily than the silence that followed. A wine glass stopped halfway to someone's lips. A waiter froze while carrying a tray of desserts. Mr. Reynolds stood motionless near the entrance, his confident smile disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Emily looked from the executive to the elderly man sitting quietly at the window. For the first time that evening, confusion crossed her face. William slowly folded his napkin and placed it neatly beside the empty teacup. Then he removed the worn knit cap, revealing neatly combed silver hair. He reached into the inside pocket of his weathered coat and carefully unfolded a pair of thin reading glasses before standing with calm dignity. The room remained completely silent. No dramatic announcement was necessary. His presence alone transformed everything. Several executives instinctively straightened their posture. Others greeted him with quiet respect. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," they said almost in unison. William acknowledged each of them with a simple nod before turning toward Emily. She still held the empty soup bowl in both hands, searching his face as though trying to reconcile the gentle guest she had served with the name everyone around her suddenly recognized. "You own Carter House?" she asked softly. William smiled with the same warmth she had shown him all evening. Not only this restaurant, he answered gently. Every Carter house across the country. A ripple of astonishment moved through the dining room. Guests whispered to one another. Several employees lowered their eyes, replaying every decision they had made since the elderly stranger had walked through the front door. Mr. Reynolds slowly approached, his face noticeably pale. Mr. Carter, if I had known. William raised one hand politely before the manager could finish. That, he said calmly, is exactly why I came without anyone knowing. His voice never rose, yet every person in the room heard every word. If respect depends on recognition, then it is not respect at all. No one spoke. Even the pianist had quietly stopped playing. William looked once more toward Emily, who remained exactly where she had been from the beginning of the evening, humble, composed, and completely unaware that the simplest act of offering one empty chair had become the most important decision anyone inside the restaurant had made that night. No one moved for several long seconds. The quiet that filled Carter House carried more weight than any speech William Carter could have prepared. He looked around the dining room, not with disappointment, but with thoughtful reflection. The polished marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the elegant uniforms, and the flawless table settings had all survived the years exactly as he had envisioned. Yet one question remained. Had the spirit behind them survived as well? William slowly turned toward the executives waiting near the entrance. Please ask everyone to remain where they are, he said calmly. No one is in trouble. I simply want us to share one conversation. His voice remained gentle, yet every employee immediately stopped what they were doing. Guests watched with respectful curiosity as the corporate leaders quietly stepped aside rather than taking control of the room. William then looked at Mr. Reynolds. The manager lowered his eyes, clearly expecting a difficult outcome. Instead, William offered him a reassuring nod. Please bring one more chair to this table. Mr. Reynolds blinked in surprise. Yes, Mr. Carter. Within moments, another chair was placed beside the window. William looked at Emily. Would you join me for a minute? Emily hesitated. I am still on duty. A faint smile crossed William's face. Tonight, this is part of your duty. She slowly sat down, still unsure why the owner of one of the largest hospitality companies in America wanted her beside him instead of standing across the room. William rested both hands on the table before speaking. Many years ago, when I opened my first restaurant, I wrote one sentence on a yellow legal pad. He paused briefly. I wrote, people will forget the menu before they forget how we made them feel. Several older employees exchanged surprised glances. Some had heard that sentence years earlier during company orientation, but few had thought about it since. William looked directly at Emily. Tonight, you reminded me of my own words. Emily gently shook her head. I only tried to do my job. No, William answered softly. You did something far more important. You protected the dignity of a guest without knowing whether he could ever repay you. He slowly reached into the pocket of his weathered coat and removed the small leather notebook. Opening it carefully, he read each line aloud. One employee still remembers what this company was built to become. She notices people before she notices money. The strongest person in the room is the one who quietly lifts everyone else. Emily's eyes widened. She had no idea he had been observing her so closely throughout the evening. William closed the notebook and placed it gently on the table. Those words were not written about an executive, a regional director, or a board member. He smiled warmly. They were written about a young waitress who offered one empty chair to someone everyone else overlooked. Around the dining room, several employees quietly reflected on their own choices from earlier that evening. Mr. Reynolds took a slow breath before stepping forward. Mr. Carter, he said sincerely, I understand now that I was protecting the reputation of the restaurant instead of protecting the purpose of the restaurant. William nodded with quiet appreciation. The good news is that purpose can always be remembered. That is why tonight was never about finding someone to blame. It was about finding someone who could remind all of us why these doors were opened in the first place. 1 month later, the first snowfall of the new year settled gently across the sidewalks outside Carter House, covering the city in a quiet blanket of white. Inside the restaurant, little seemed different at first glance. The same crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished tables. The same piano melodies drifted softly through the dining room. The same front door welcomed guests escaping the winter cold. Yet something invisible had changed. Every visitor who stepped through those doors received the same sincere greeting before anyone looked at a reservation, a designer coat, or an expensive watch. The corner table by the window had quietly become known among the staff as the welcome table. It was never reserved for the wealthiest customer. It was kept available whenever possible for someone who simply needed to feel seen. Emily Brooks still wore the same elegant black and white uniform, but beneath the silver name tag rested a small line of embroidered lettering that had not been there before. Leadership Apprentice. She had accepted the opportunity only after asking William one simple question. Are you certain someone like me belongs in that program? William had smiled exactly as he had on the night they first met. Someone like you is the reason the program should exist. Her training did not begin in a boardroom. Instead, William invited her to visit restaurants across the country, not to study financial reports first, but to observe people. Together they watched hosts welcome nervous first dates, servers comfort tired travelers, and cooks prepare meals with quiet pride. At every location, William repeated the same lesson. Buildings create restaurants. People create memories. Emily filled notebooks with observations rather than business formulas. She discovered that leadership was not measured by the number of employees who obeyed instructions. It was measured by the number of people who felt respected after every interaction. Mr. Reynolds changed as well. He gathered his team before every Friday dinner service and shared one story about kindness before discussing reservations or revenue. The younger employees noticed the difference immediately. The atmosphere grew calmer. Guests smiled more often. Compliments arrived more frequently than complaints. Months later, independent surveys ranked Carter House as the highest-rated restaurant in the entire company for guest satisfaction, not because it served the most expensive meals, but because visitors consistently described one feeling. They felt welcome. On a snowy Friday evening much like the first one, William arrived once again without an announcement. This time he wore his usual tailored overcoat instead of worn clothes. Yet before entering he paused across the street for a quiet moment. Through the large front window, he saw Emily guiding an elderly man toward the same corner table with the same gentle smile she had offered him weeks before. She did not recognize the stranger. She did not need to. She simply noticed someone standing alone. William remained outside for another minute, watching silently as she poured warm tea, adjusted the chair, and wished the guest a peaceful evening. Then he smiled to himself and walked away without stepping inside. He no longer needed another test. The answer had already been found. Sometimes the greatest fortune a person can build is not measured in dollars, properties, or companies. Sometimes it begins with one empty chair, one quiet act of kindness, and one heart that chooses to see the person before the appearance. Because in the end, the people who change the world are rarely the loudest voices in the room. They are often the quiet ones who simply refuse to let another human being stand alone.